everyone thinks that Canada's defined by the healthcare. I mean, to your point, if that's our definition, we're all in trouble, I can tell you that. Thank you, Sam, for inviting me here today. I've followed your progress on this whole initiative. It's, I think, quite unique and quite original, and I think you're spot on about trying to set the table, grow some capacity of our community to step up and do the hard work of being a politician. Through my life, I've known lots of politicians. We could all have opinions of politicians, but none that it's all hard work. It doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you come from. People put themselves out there, and so my hat's off to everyone who does it, and you continue to this day to work for the betterment of our community, so thank you for that. I'm just going to talk briefly on sort of civic responsibilities or civic commissions and civic boards. Like, if you ever go online, there are hundreds of them, right? It's bewildering how many boards, either at the municipal level, provincial level, federal level, and so I'm always wondering, like, why are there so many? You know, you look at budgets and you think, oh my God, why don't you just cut half of these out? But really, they're an expression of our own community. We want politicians at every level of government to do stuff for us and provide services for us, and they do that. They do that really well, and but they don't want to run them, and because they're on limited times. You're on 3, 4, 5 year cycles. And the people that initiate these endeavors sometimes don't make the whole cycle or go around the second time. So you create bodies of organizations and governance bodies to actually carry on and manage many of these programs. So that's kind of why there's so many. We as a community haven't decided to take away a whole bunch yet, right? We haven't made our own collective decision to stop this and stop that. We keep adding some stuff, and it's all good. It all has some value somewhere for someone. So there's a great need, particularly on government change, there's a great need to have like hundreds of people either reappointed, and they're hard to find, quite frankly, because they don't pay well. Government boards don't really, certainly don't pay very much. They take a lot of time. If you really want to run an organization well, it takes the time and effort like it would any other sort of for-profit corporation. So you're trying to find the people that have the capacity, the skill set to manage big stuff at times. And so I reflect back on the library, like why did I do all this stuff? I don't know. Gordon, I think, was the leader of the opposition in those days. And he was friends, for some reason, with our banker, and said that, why doesn't Kip and John Woodward pick up the ball? I think the city library fundraising campaign had stumbled along the way. So why don't we reinvigorate it? So my brother and I took that on as sort of a challenge. No one had raised money for a library before because they raised money for universities and schools and hospitals, but libraries were always a government-supported institution. And so we did it, and that was great. We actually had some fun with it and talked to lots of people I would never have ever normally talked to. And I took an interest in healthcare. When I actually left Woodward's, one of my mentors was the fellow who ran GE Canada. So the consumer division, we buy toasters and all the GE products for the department stores. And he was actually a wonderful guy. And he told me about a company in Illinois this is like 1989 or so. A company who had a mobile MRI. So this was brand new technology in the day. They were really expensive. But GE made the MRI machine. They had the finance division, and they had the trucks, and this guy in Illinois was driving around a small town, Illinois, to small towns and delivering MRI services to communities that would never, ever be able to afford them. So I thought, well, this is a great idea. We can go to Kelowna and Kamloops and Prince George, and those days the machines were like $3 million. It was like a lot of money in those days, and the government wasn't buying them, right? They had one, I think, at VGH, and maybe one coming to St. Paul's. But they were all over America at the time. And so I sort of built a business plan, went to I think it was the Socreds then, and they told me, no, it's against the law. And I stopped dead. I said, what do you mean it's against the law? And no, you're providing a service that the government pays for. And I said, well, you're not providing the service, right? It's not happening, right? So it piqued my curiosity about sort of healthcare. And I found myself on the St. Paul's Foundation, and then St. Paul's merged all their properties with the other hospitals and created Providence. So it was an independent board away from government. The Catholic Church actually owns all the property. The board is actually appointed by the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic, but it was arm's distance from the government. So the biggest problem 20 years ago was replacing the old hospital. It had already been a 15-year-old project that had failed many times. So some of us around the board, Gordon had come into power, no more spending, can't borrow any money. So, but the opportunity came up to buy that chunk of land where the hospital's going now. But we didn't have to ask government for permission. But we couldn't have any debt on the books. So we created a arm's length trust to actually buy the property. We had no money to buy the property. So we went to the Royal Bank, and it was $19 million at the time. And so could we borrow the money? Not really. So it's land, it's a hospital, it's all a good thing. Well, so I think Philip Owen was the mayor at the time, and he gave us a letter to say, well, if nothing ever happened here, the city would buy the land back from us. So with that letter, we went to the Royal Bank. I said, we can't pay you interest. We have no money to pay you interest, so just capitalize it. So we bought this chunk of land, about 23 acres there. And here we are, 23 years later, and we're finally getting going. But that whole process could only happen if you actually had a group of people who just wanted to sort of break the rules a little bit, right? And for the benefit of the community. So fast forward, Kevin asked me to join the Vancouver Coastal Health Board. I had a wonderful predecessor, David Thompson, who was the CEO of Tech Kamenko. Just a razor sharp guy. He could look at a bundle of data like this and find the comma that was in the wrong spot. And so they had a spending problem, and he and his chair of the finance committee fixed that problem. And it allowed myself and the new board to sort of build out the organization and really try to develop management capacity, because it was our observation that healthcare spends no money on developing management capacity. So it's probably the largest employer in our community by far. If you add up the academic and the research and the science and the delivery systems, it's probably the biggest. It's probably the worst nightmare for a finance minister. I know it's the worst nightmare for a health minister. There's never a good day you can come home. I remember George Abbott saying, I can never come home without one good letter, right? And but it's the foundation of what we do as a community. So picking the boards was tricky. Again, you had to find the people with capacity, time, and so Gordon's regime, Gordon made a big attempt to actually get the right people in the right boards and the right industries to actually try to run stuff, and that kind of worked for most of the time. Christie, less so. I don't mind, this is all in camera here, so isn't it? And so Christie was more creeping in terms of political appointees, which is kind of okay if you've got still more than half your board that are all sort of doing work. And then we had a full change of government now, and this is when it really changes. The whole ideological approach to healthcare really shifts. And so a number of us spent our probably 10 or 15 years trying to keep politicians out of healthcare, because it's really about the patient if you really believe that. And so we have a whole new regime, deeply set ideology on the role of industry, the role of private industry, helping, assisting, being a partner. So that is all quickly really chucked out the door. As you're right, I did last for 18 months. I thought that was marvelous until the other part of my life I've been a partner with Brian Day since he started Canby Surgeries. Always disclose that. We never did any government work. He couldn't stand getting government work because they didn't pay on time, and they're not a good customer. So, and you've read about his fight for, been 3.5 years in court, the longest trial I think in Canadian history. Just ended last Friday. So during the course of the events last year, Adrian wanted to shut down all the clinics. He introduced some legislation last October to shut down all the MRIs, surgical clinics. We've been in business for 20 years, really, as an assistant to, an addendum to the public system. So he wanted it ideologically gone, right? And so he passed some legislation mid-trial, so there's a whole bunch of law about you can't do that. And so he lost on the injunction, and then he appealed, and he lost the appeal. And that's when the phone call came the next day to me. So Brian and his team soldiered on through immense difficulty. And I went there maybe over the 3.5 years, about 5 times, just to sit for an hour in the court and see what was going on. Extraordinary. There was 10 lawyers, 4 from the province, 4 from the feds, and 2 from the interveners every day for 3.5 years. And Brian, we had 1.5, right? And they try to bury you with data, saying they don't have material, they don't have these documents, and they find them and they give you 200,000 pages. So they just try to defer, kind of bleed you out. And so that will be a big deal for Canada when this decision is rendered. I know probably next year sometime. It's going to take a while, I think, for the judge to go through the mountain of stuff. And it will be appealed, and we'll land our way back into the Supreme Court. And so what makes it interesting is to be part of sort of a discussion that takes place, which is it's not black and white healthcare, and the delivery of healthcare is never black and white. And I was always hoping that any government leaders would take us to the best jurisdiction who's doing the best job. So that's providing the most amount of public care and public access for the best amount of money. And there's lots of great places around the world that kind of do this way better than we do. And it was always a shame I could never convince the political leadership to actually just stop, look, and listen, and let's just go see, how is it being done in Switzerland or Denmark or Holland and other places. And so it was an intractable Canadian problem. Everyone thinks that Canada's defined by the healthcare. I mean, to your point, if that's our definition, we're all in trouble, I can tell you that. So, but it was about moving the needle, or how can you move the needle with the politicians at a very high level. I've probably met with every premier, every health minister, who doesn't want Brian to secretly win this case, right? And then that will afford them the opportunity to actually enact legislation. It's the only rail you talk about in politics that no one talks about. I can't remember an election where healthcare has been a topic, despite what goes on. It's a dead-end road for any politician to bring up, I want to change healthcare in Canada. You just won't make it, right? So that's why it's not talked about. So I guess you have to do this sort of civilian route to sort of change opinions, hopefully. So anyway, it's been really fun. And I guess it's one of those things, if you do these things on a volunteer basis, if you say you do one, then people come and get you to do another. And I don't know how long this goes on for, but one of the things I found personally rewarding is that you met wonderful people on these boards that you would never normally meet in your own work of your field of work. So that's been quite rewarding, and those relationships have been rewarding and valuable. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.